At exactly 9:47 a.m., the ground in central London began to vibrate. It wasn't the tube, and it wasn't the usual tourist bustle. It was the sound of the first tractor rolling onto Whitehall, a 10-ton steel reminder that the countryside had finally run out of patience. For months, the Labour government treated the rural community like a line item on a spreadsheet, a loophole to be closed by a 20% inheritance tax. But as 10,000 tractors choked the arteries of Westminster, the Whitehall varnish began to crack. This wasn't a protest by activists. It was a movement of people who wake up before the sun to feed a nation that has forgotten their names. Jeremy Clarkson didn't lead them because he wanted a new TV plot. He led them because he realized that for the family farm, this wasn't policy, it was a death sentence.
The disconnect in this story is purely mathematical. In the air-conditioned offices of the Treasury, a £3 million farm looks like a pile of cash. In reality, that £3 million is mud, debt and ancient machinery that yields maybe £30,000 in profit on a lucky year. When the government announced a 20% tax on land valued above £1 million, they were effectively asking the next generation to hand over £600,000 they don't have. You cannot pay a tax bill with a tractor, and you cannot sell a field without killing the farm. Clarkson's strike back wasn't just celebrity noise, it was a cold, hard look at the arithmetic of attrition. If the children have to sell the land to pay the tax, the family farm dies, and the land is swallowed by developers. It is a liquidation of British heritage dressed up as fiscal fairness.
When the government tried to dismiss the revolt as celebrity astroturfing, the farmers played their final card. They showed London what happens when the tractors stop moving. A one-day national strike saw food deliveries vanish. In the West End and across major cities, the milk disappeared and the fresh produce aisles went cold. It was a visceral lesson in strategic dependency. Suddenly, the urban voter, the very people the government relies on, realised that food security isn't a feeling, it's a physical reality measured in acres and yields. The tractor siege proved that while you can manage the media and spin the polls, you cannot eat a press release. The government didn't blink because they felt bad, they blinked because the country was staring at empty shelves.
A year later, the retreat is almost complete. The thresholds have been moved, the payment terms stretched, and the policy refined into a ghost of its former self. There were no apologies from the dispatch box, just a quiet surrender to the reality of the mud. But the damage to the social contract is permanent. Jeremy Clarkson is still farming, still battling the Cotswold weather, and still refusing to move out of the way. He has proven that the people with spreadsheets are no match for the people with grit, when the stakes are existential. The countryside came to London, and for the first time in a generation, London realised that the most dangerous person to ignore is the one who puts the bread on your table. Whitehall has been warned. The tractors may have gone home, but they left their tracks all over the halls of power.
You should be here standing with us!
The British government has just done the unthinkable. It has pushed aside 1.33 million citizens waiting for social housing and moved to prioritise illegal migrants for brand new council homes. There was no warning, no national debate, no attempt to justify why those who have contributed nothing to Britain should leap ahead of those who have waited years. The announcement landed like a political explosion, not whispered, not disguised, but presented as policy, and the nation erupted. The question now gripping the nation is brutally simple. How did we get here?
In Ashfield alone, we've got about 7,000 people on the council house waiting list. It's been like that for many, many years. And to suggest that asylum seekers, and let's be honest, a lot of these aren't genuine asylum seekers, they're illegal migrants crossing the channel. and getting loads and loads of freebies in our country. To suggest, though, that these are going to go to the top of the queue above the residents, the born and bred Ashfield residents in my constituency, is absolutely disgusting.
It began with an unassuming policy update pushed out of Whitehall. 5 local authorities had volunteered for a new pilot scheme to house asylum seekers directly in council homes. The stated aim was to reduce the reliance on hotels. But within minutes of the announcement, the political temperature shifted. In Ashfield, in Brighton, in Hackney, in Peterborough, and deep into rural Wales, councillors were blindsided. Emails, messages and calls flooded in, each one sharpened by disbelief. Reform MP Lee Anderson gave voice to what millions were already thinking when he labelled the plan disgusting. His district alone has 7,000 residents waiting for housing, many for years. Veterans, pensioners, disabled residents, young families hanging on with rising rents, all facing the prospect of being overtaken by individuals who arrived illegally by boat. And the shockwaves didn't stop there. A councillor in Powys revealed her area had nearly 4,000 people waiting on the social housing list, some for almost 3 years, yet no one had been told that newly built homes might bypass them entirely. In communities where local surgeries have shut down, where schools are closing, and where there is no general hospital, the idea of adding more demand to a collapsing system feels like lighting a match beside dry grass.
The backlash was immediate and unfiltered. Keir Starmer's government, already weakened by plummeting approval ratings, watched as frustration turned into fury. Social media erupted, local forums exploded, radio phone-ins became battlegrounds of anger as callers questioned how their own government could justify such a move. People in London expressed disbelief that asylum seekers were being placed in accommodation the average resident cannot even dream of affording. Others pointed to Glasgow, already labelled Europe's asylum seeker capital, warning that this policy could turn their towns into the next hotspot. One councillor bluntly warned that people smugglers would now advertise Britain as the land where a free house awaits you. This is political TNT, landing just months before the May local elections, and every opposition strategist knows the line that will appear on leaflets: vote Labour, lose your council home.
To understand the scale of the outrage, you must understand the state of the country. Britain is already gripped by a housing emergency. NHS waiting lists have ballooned, homelessness is rising sharply, and immigration remains one of the most divisive issues in the national debate. Anti-immigration protests spread across the UK through 2025, fueled by the sense that the system is not only overwhelmed, but fundamentally unfair. Despite repeated promises to restore order and take control, the government has struggled to contain small boat crossings. Costs for migrant hotels continue to escalate. Enforcement bodies are stretched to capacity. And while ministers emphasise new asylum reforms, Britons feel they are witnessing a government drifting rather than governing. This is the context in which the council housing announcement landed. Not in a moment of stability, but in a moment where every fracture is already visible.
The consequences for the government could be seismic. Starmer's promise of grown-up politics now rings hollow for many voters who believe the system favours those arriving illegally over those who have contributed to the country for generations. Local councils feel abandoned, communities feel unheard, and even moderate voices warn that dispersing asylum seekers across council homes will make oversight extremely difficult. Hotels, for all their flaws, kept people in one place. Council homes scatter them across towns and estates, making monitoring nearly impossible. This is not just a housing policy, it is a security vulnerability, and it is a political liability of extraordinary scale.
Britain's political calendar is unforgiving. Local elections are only months away. Every party now sees an opportunity or a threat. For the government, this is a nightmare that will follow them everywhere, every doorstep, every debate, every interview. For their opponents, it is a perfect storm. A government struggling with borders, failing on housing, and now pushing a policy that places asylum seekers ahead of citizens. The narrative almost writes itself. A government out of touch, prioritising outsiders over its own electorate, and destabilising already fragile communities. It is the kind of story that cuts across class, region, and ideology. Everyone knows someone on a housing list. Everyone feels the pressure on public services. Everyone senses the imbalance.
This is why the anger will not fade, because people are not simply reacting to a policy, they are reacting to a pattern.
This crisis exposes a deeper reality. Britain has been heading towards this moment for years. Housing shortages, slow asylum processing, and years of underinvestment created the perfect storm, and this policy is simply where it all erupts. The backlash isn't just about migrants getting homes, it's about communities already stripped of services now being asked to absorb even more pressure. In places that have lost hospitals, GP access, youth centres and public travel, the message feels brutally clear. Their needs remain secondary. That sense of abandonment is what turns frustration into political anger. The government argues the plan saves money compared to hotels, but that misses the point. Housing is emotional terrain, stability, fairness, belonging. When people waiting years see newcomers appear to jump the queue, no amount of fiscal logic can override the feeling of injustice. And that is the real danger. The government treated a housing crisis as a bureaucratic issue, when it is actually a cultural and political fault line. This isn't just one bad decision. It taps into a deeper belief that the system no longer works for ordinary Britons. That is why the reaction is so fierce. It's not about a pilot scheme. It's about trust and who the state chooses to stand with.
The country stands in disbelief and rising anxiety. A government insists it is acting responsibly. Millions insist they have been pushed aside. And somewhere between those two positions lies the truth of a nation wrestling with fairness, identity, and trust. This story will not quietly disappear. It will define the coming months. It may define the next election. And the question echoing across the country is the one the government cannot escape. If this is what fairness looks like, what happens next?
For 2 centuries, British policing has been defined by its local roots, but tonight that history has been rewritten. The Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has just announced the most significant shake-up of law and order since the police service was founded. A new, nationwide police force is being established to take control of the country's most serious and complex crimes. While the government calls this a bold step forward, many are asking if this is a genuine solution to the spike in violent crime or simply a desperate attempt to centralise power. As this news broke, another crisis erupted at Wormwood Scrubs prison, where protesters breached the perimeter, forcing a lockdown. The message is clear. Britain is reaching a tipping point on law and order. Today, we're looking at the master plan behind the new National Police Service and what it really means for your local streets.
Let's look at the data. Currently, the UK operates with 43 separate police forces. The Home Office argues that this fragmented model allows serious criminals to slip through the cracks. The new national force will absorb the National Crime Agency, counter-terrorism units, and even roads policing. The logic? Efficiency. By centralising the helicopters, the drones, and the elite crime units, regional forces are, in theory, freed up to focus on the core business of shoplifting, burglary, and antisocial behaviour. But critics, including those on our panel tonight, worry this is lipstick on a pig. They argue that without more boots on the ground, centralisation is just window dressing. Furthermore, the abolition of police and crime commissioners, the elected officials who were supposed to give you a say in how your area is policed, suggests a move away from policing by consent and toward a top-down command structure dictated by Whitehall.
Why now? The political atmosphere around crime is at a boiling point. Whether it's the hate marches on the streets of London or the shock breach at Wormwood Scrubs, the public feels unsafer than they have in decades. Jonathan Gullis notes that millions are being drained from local budgets to deal with national protests, while shopkeepers are left to fend for themselves. The new force is designed to tackle people smuggling and serious organised crime. But for the average taxpayer, the question remains,
Will this stop the theft on my high street? The government is being judged on crime and disorder. If this new centralised model fails to deliver serious criminals in cells, it will be seen as the ultimate failure of the Starmer administration.
A national force for a national crisis. The Home Office has put its cards on the table. They've abolished the commissioners, streamlined the command, and created a super force to take back control. To the viewers who stayed, you are seeing the total reorganisation of the British state in real time. Our promise to you is to track the results, not the press releases. We confirm that the old model of policing is dead. Whether the new one can survive the reality of Britain's streets is yet to be seen. Curiosity about two-tier results isn't going away. It's being codified into the system.